Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Little Woman podcast. Here are the comment shoutouts, and the first one goes to Laurie. 19th century Germany was very different from 20th century Germany. Back in Victorian times, it was supposed to be a romantic country, in the same way France is considered romantic by Americans today. It was the cradle of the romantic literary movement, and people used to go there in order to get the best musical education. Nat goes to Germany as a way of polishing his musical training. In Joe's Boys, there is an interesting description of Germany. I have found the contrast very striking. It is so different from what people think of Germany today. I also love German culture, but when I tell people I am learning German, they look at me in distrust, like I have some sort of sympathy for the regime, which is not true. My mother, who studied world literature, used to tell me how Germans studied and analyzed Hitler's discourses at school to avoid falling for such leaders again. And they never did. But some people are willfully ignorant and want to believe falsehoods no matter what. The second comment shoutout goes to Kevin. Quote, "As a German, I can confirm everything you said. Germans learn in school mostly about World War II and also very one-sided. Great achievements of the German people in the pre-World War eras get little attention and in general will be presented very critical of the Germans. This created generations of self-hating Germans, which are often severely uneducated of their own history, except World War II, of course. Anything presenting Germany, patriotism, etc. as positive will usually get called Nazi by the left wing. It is quite sad, really. I just visited Berlin last week and I thought about this a lot. I do wish that people would have a lot more nuanced way to look at German culture, and hopefully this podcast can help to raise some awareness, at least a little bit. Because when Louisa May Alcott was a young person, there was a certain air of romanticism connected to Germany. German literature and philosophy was important to her and inspired her. And without that, we wouldn't have Little Woman. And I bet a lot of other American books as well. Christina and I continue to discuss about the chapter Friend. One of the things that frustrates me in Little Woman research is that when people talk about this chapter, they say that Jo is a feminist hero when she writes sensational stories, and that she is, quote, a victim of patriarchy because Friedrich does not like sensationalism. These are all things that Greta Gerwig has said in her interviews. But the more I do this podcast, the more I feel that she hasn't read Little Woman, and she uses so-called feminist card just to make money. When Christina and I started to dissect this chapter, it became more and more clear that Louisa does not represent this kind of work as feminist. It is the opposite. She's in a bad place mentally when she's working for this magazine. And Friedrich is really the hero in this chapter. The whole name of the chapter is Friend. And just think about it. There are millions of people who read Greta Gerwig's interviews and they read, oh, Friedrich forced Jo to stop writing, which never happens in the book. And then they read something that she says, oh, Jo wanted to write these sensational stories, Friedrich stopped her. So she lies to all of these people and she spreads false information about Little Woman and she spreads false information about Louisa May Alcott. And people think that she's some kind of feminist who, quote, saves Jo. It's completely messed up. Anyway, in this chapter, Jo goes to work for a sensational magazine called Weekly Volcano. And in the chapter, Louisa May Alcott writes that Jo herself is ashamed of these stories that she's writing, and the editor calls her a hack, and that Jo is easily disposable. If you are watching this on YouTube or some other place where you can leave comments, I would love to hear thoughts about this chapter. And do you think Jo is treated fairly in this magazine? Because I don't think she is. I also really want to thank Christina for taking the time to talk with me about this chapter for this podcast. It was a really good conversation, and I hope you liked this episode. This is Little Woman Podcast, Joe March, sensational writer, underpaid, and disposable.
That would still put some judgment on her writing, whether it would have affected her as much not having her father be a preacher. The narrator does say at one point, Jo thought to herself, I am just glad that Marmee and father don't know of what I've done. That is her first thought when she started working for the magazine, was thinking of her parents and the lessons that they taught her. I think that maybe there is still more conflict, but I think, as she says, I wish I wouldn't have a conscience when she got that conscience from her parents. I think that her parents were a good mix of not too easy, but not too strict, that it helps to guide her in ways she would eventually be writing.
In that chapter where Jo publishes her first book, I think there is a moment in the end where she literally says that she wishes that she had an unbiased person to look at her writings and help her. That is such a clear foreshadowing for Friedrich's character. That is so important.
I think in order to really advance as a writer or any kind of artist, let's just say even like a filmmaker, actor, director, whatever, you are going to need someone with unbiased opinion who is thinking ultimately the end goal should be a good product or a good story. We've got to look at what is best for your story, not what is best for your ego.
True, somebody commented on Tumblr on this chapter that it reminded them of their university teachers when they gave them feedback. That was a throwback. Sometimes I was so frustrated with my uni teachers, but then I know that they wanted me to do the best work that I could do in that moment.
I remember when I went to school, university teachers would have a mid-semester meeting. Each of them would tell me how I was doing in their class, and they would say, you could be doing better than this, but I can see that you are improving, or I can see that you are working hard. You are lacking here, but you are doing better there. I wish you would try a little bit more, have more confidence in yourself. You know, in the end, it is to help you, but you sit there and you go like, I was kind of hoping I would get glowing reviews, but in the end, as much as you sit there thinking like, in order to get the glowing reviews, you got to take to heart what they say, because they are not saying it maliciously. They are saying it because they know you can do better. Oh,
It is so important that we acknowledge that Jo hasn't really studied literature, and I don't think during this time it was okay for a woman to study literature in general in school or in the university. Basically, Jo's education in literature is that she has been reading Goethe and other writers.
right.
It is not a wonder that she wants some kind of a tutor figure into her life. She has never had any. In the earlier chapter, when she is admiring this female writer who made tons of money writing sensational stories, she thinks, oh, I can do that as well. And then she calls those stories trash because she knows that they are not good literature. At the same time, she has this inner fight. She wants to be a good writer, but then how do you make money and become a good writer? It is that growth process, and she doesn't really have any kind of education for this job because it wasn't available.
It is one of those things you have to build experience in order to get experience on job applications, what you need. They want you to have this and this. And when you have that experience, it's like, I can't get that experience unless you offer me that experience. And I think Jo doesn't know exactly how she can get the experience. So she actually goes through it. Even if she had money, I think she couldn't have gone to university to study literature. she would have had someone who went to college and reteach what they learned to her to truly get the knowledge that she is seeking, or as she has studied books and trying to see what makes this good, what makes this bad, what doesn't work. You can't blame her because she wants to do this thing, but she doesn't know where to start. You just have to dive right in and try your best, even if you fall flat on your face 100 times. You just got to put it out there somehow. And to her so far, this has been the only way that she has been able to properly get published, even if it is sensational stories. It's a foot in the door and it's money in the pocket. And it is one of those things like, well, I will only do this for a short time and then I get to writing what I really want to write.
When she went again, Mr. Dashwood was alone, whereat she rejoiced. Mr. Dashwood was much wider awake than before. Each was agreeable, and Mr. Dashwood was not too deeply absorbed in a cigar to remember his manners. So the second interview was much more comfortable than the first. "We'll take this. Editors never say aye. If you don't object to a few alterations. It is too long, but omitting the passages I've marked will make it just the right length," he said in a businesslike tone. Jo hardly knew her own MS again, so crumpled and underscored were its pages and paragraphs, but feeling as a tender parent might on being asked to cut off her baby's legs, in order that it might fit into a new cradle, she looked at marked passages, and was surprised to find that all the moral reflections, which she had carefully put in as ballast for much romance, had been stricken out. "But, sir, I thought every story should have some sort of a moral, so I took care to have a few of my sinners repent." Mr. Dashwood's editorial gravity relaxed into a smile, for Jo had forgotten her friend, and spoken as only an author could. "People want to be amused, not preached at, you know. Morals don't sell nowadays," which was not quite a correct statement, by the way. "You think it would do with these alterations, then?" "Yes, it's a new plot, and pretty well worked up. Language is good, and so on," was Mr. Dashwood's affable reply. That is, what compensation?" began Jo, not exactly knowing how to express herself. "Oh, yes. Well, we give from 25 to 30 for things of this sort. Pay when it comes out," returned Mr. Dashwood, as if that point had escaped him. Such trifles do escape the editorial mind, it is said. "Very well, you can have it," said Jo, handing back the story with a satisfied air. After the dollar a column work, even 25 seemed good pay. "Shall I tell my friend you will take another if she has one better than this?" asked Jo, unconscious of her little slip of the tongue, and emboldened by her success. "Well, we'll look at it. Can't promise to take it. Tell her to make it short and spicy, and never mind the moral. What name would your friend like to put on it?" in a careless tone. "None at all, if you please. She doesn't wish her name to appear, and has no nom de plume," said Jo, blushing in spite of herself. "Just as she likes, of course. The tale will be out next week. Will you call for the money, or shall I send it?" asked Mr. Dashwood, who felt a natural desire to know who his new contributor might be. "I will call. Good morning, sir." As she departed, Mr. Dashwood put up his feet, and a graceful remark, "Poor embrowned, as usual, but she will do." I wrote to one of my articles that Mr. Dashwood treats Jo like she is disposable. It does remind me of contact factories like BuzzFeed or internet houses. There's been discussion recently that they don't pay enough for their creators.
Jo is like, what should I do? I'm that Jo would have just been like, shall do. I am more than just do. I will. I just feel bad for her when she says about her manuscript that she hardly knew it. The description says, is like a parent having to cut her baby's legs. And that is so personal. I worked so hard to do this. I nurtured it. I fed it. I gave birth to it. Now you want me to like to hack it. And I can definitely feel that frustration and pain that she feels. It is not just like, oh, you had a little bit of a run out. Instead of saying, can't do, can we full on hack it? Like in the horror movie Leatherface with a chainsaw going through it, so disheartening to her. It's again opening the door to her putting money in her pocket. As she says, poor crowd, she needs money to send home.
I have spoken with people who have said that, oh, Louisa May Alcott loved writing thrilling stories. And I'm like, yes, but there are differences with the publications. She didn't always particularly enjoy writing to this magazine, and that is the difference. She didn't like the editor, and they took away those moral lessons. When I have read Louisa May Alcott's thrillers, there usually is some kind of a moral lesson. She writes here, Sir, I thought every story should have a moral lesson, so I took care to have few of my sinners repent. I remember reading Rose in Bloom. Spoiler alerts for those who haven't read it. There's the character of Charlie, who is the Laurie archetype of the story. In the beginning, it is said that Charlie wants to marry Rose for her money. Charlie dies in the novel, and it is sad. Charlie did repent, but his actions are also being dismissed. Sometimes I wish that Louisa May Alcott would have been more strict with these guys who are after the girl's money or are harassing the female characters. Part of that is the time period. You cannot be too hateful towards the male gender in the 19th century. Maybe it is the internalized misogyny we have talked about. I don't always feel satisfied as a reader when I read her thrilling stories. I don't feel like all of her quote-unquote villains always get what they do deserve.
Yes, it makes me think. The other day I saw someone saying, like, tell me what trope you don't like to see. And the first thing I thought of was forgiving the abuser or villain. Some people say you should have space in your heart to forgive. And I am like, if that is what you feel, fine. In their stories, they are like, you need to forgive. You need to in order to move on. Why? And I speak this through personal experience. Someone in my life for a long while was abusive to me and a few others. And all that we ever did was to forgive. And the moment I told myself once more when that happened, I'm done with forgiving, then I truly felt like I was free of this. I don't feel like I am being weighed down. Some people are like, you should forgive because it is not right to be angry. But I feel like some characters deserve to be angry. They earn that anger for many years of suppressing those feelings, all those times of not being allowed to feel angry or feel free instead of feeling terrified and sad. Well, I guess I will forgive you because you said you are sorry. And I do believe in giving people second chances if they really do deserve it. For some people, just say, they're sorry because they know if they say sorry, they have a safety net. They can come back and do the same thing. And that is just what was happening in my situation. And I was like, I can't. The only way I can to move on is to say, no, I am not forgiving you. If it is what helps you to heal, to not to forgive, fine, because some people haven't changed. Some people don't deserve to be forgiven because when you did forgive them, it never got to their head that what they did was wrong. But when you say, I am not going to forgive you, your hope sinks in. And the only time I acknowledge the I forgive you trope worked was in live action Cinderella, because she says that, and out the door she goes, I forgive and I never think of you again. And that is when it really hits her on Lady Tremaine. I won't be thought about again, and nothing I've done has imprinted on her. And Cinderella's just like, whatever, I forgive you, and that is fine. But also, at this point, I will never think of you again, just because it is, quote unquote, a Christian thing to do that often would appear in fiction. That doesn't mean forgiving to a bad person is a right call. You got to see someone actually doing better in order to make the forgiveness work. That is my long rant about my least favorite tropes in fiction is pressured to give into forgiving as an individual. Not really a great person is downright a horrible person.
That reminds me how in the film Ever After, Drew Barrymore's Cinderella says the same thing to Angelica Houston. I forgive you, but I will never think of you again. I think it is some kind of a Cinderella trope.
With Laurie, like you said, at least he apologizes and does give this speech about, I am sorry about the way I was. And now that we are both in our right places, I can, like you said, honestly share my heart with my sister Jo and my wife Amy, love them dearly. Louisa was able to sort of give it a little bit more truth to it, saying a display of maturity and really say, I am sorry. It really was bad of me to hurt you, but I hope you can see that I am much better now and can love you as my sister and friend. Hopefully we can move on from there. I feel like you can, at very least, to show that you are mature enough and prove that you have done something better. As Amy says, do something worthy of Joe's love. And he was able to recapture familial love of a sister and a friend by maturing, being able to have her forgiveness because she can see you have grown. You are my friend, and I see my old Teddy now who is not so love stuck on me. That annoys me when I see stories that are like, oh my God, I am so sorry. Forgive me. I am close to death. Okay, I don't feel like that really shows much of anything. You are just scared that you are going to die with this bad thing on your conscience, but whatever.
In Work, Story of Experience, which is another Louisa May Alcott book, there's a character called Fletcher, and he is harassing Christy, who is the main character. Fletcher gets wounded in the war, and then he asks her to forgive him, and she does. I think it is interesting that in Louisa May Alcott books, when there's a male character who is harassing the female character, like Charlie and Fletcher, and even Laurie asks Joe to forgive him. I don't remember what word he uses, that he was being silly when he was younger. She says, we cannot go back to childhood, but we can still be friends and you can be my brother. That is never in any Little Woman movies, how Laurie actually asks Joe to forgive him, and the films don't really show the entire part of him harassing her. But in general, I think during this time period, it was very difficult to question male authority. That is why these men either die, and in their deathbed, these women forgive them, or they end up in another healthier relationship where they grow, like Laurie does with Amy.
There are lots of stories about these parents who are like, please come to me. I want to tell you I am sorry and forgive me and bless me. When I come across those, it's like, too bad for your conscience. You are not sorry. I hate to say this, but my mom sometimes says, oh, they got it nicer because they were closer to death. That is a horrible thing to say, but like, it is somewhat true that when you know that death is nearby, you will get a little bit nicer because you don't want regret before leaving, and you want everything to be okay, whether or not you do believe into afterlife or not. You want to go in with a clean slate and good. Following Mr. Dashwood's directions and making Mrs. Northberry her model, Jo rashly took a plunge into the frothy sea of sensational literature, but thanks to the life preserver thrown her by a friend, she came up again, not much the worse for her ducking. Like most young scribblers, she went abroad for her characters and scenery, and banditti, counts, gypsies, nuns, and duchesses appeared upon her stage and played their parts with as much accuracy and spirit as could be expected. Her readers were not particular about such trifles as grammar, punctuation, and probability, and Mr. Dashwood graciously permitted her to fill his columns at the lowest prices, not thinking it necessary to tell her that the real cause of his hospitality was the fact that one of his hacks on being offered higher wages had basically left him in the lurch. She soon became interested in her work, for her emaciated purse grew stout, and the little hoard she was making to take Beth to the mountains Next summer grew slowly but surely as the weeks passed. One thing disturbed her satisfaction, and that was that she did not tell them at home. She had a feeling that father and mother would not approve and preferred to have her own way first and beg pardon afterward. It was easy to keep her secret, for no name appeared with her stories. Mr. Dashwood had, of course, found it out very soon, but promised to be dumb, and for a wonder kept his word. She thought it would do her no harm, for she sincerely meant to write nothing of which she would be ashamed, and quieted all pricks of conscience by anticipations of the happy minute when she should show her earnings and laugh over her well-kept secret. But Mr. Dashwood rejected any but thrilling tales, and as thrills could not be produced except by harrowing up the souls of the readers, history and romance, land and sea, science and art, police records, and lunatic asylums had to be ransacked for the purpose. Jo soon found that her innocent experience had given her but few glimpses of the tragic world which underlies society. Regarding it in a business light, she set about supplying her deficiencies with characteristic energy, eager to find material for stories and bent on making them original in plot, if not masterly in execution. She searched newspapers for accidents, incidents, and crimes. She excited the suspicions of public librarians by asking for works on poisons. She studied faces in the street and characters, good, bad, and indifferent, all about her. She delved in the dust of ancient times for facts or fiction so old that they were as good as new, and introduced herself to folly, sin, and misery, as well as her limited opportunities allowed. She thought she was prospering finely, but unconsciously she was beginning to desecrate some of the womanliest attributes of a woman's character. She was living in bad society, and imaginary though it was, its influence affected her, for she was feeding heart and fancy on dangerous and unsubstantial food, and was fast brushing the innocent bloom from her nature by a premature acquaintance with the darker side of life, which comes soon enough to all of us.
I think that has a lot to do with Christianity, that these particular characters that I mentioned, they ask forgiveness in their deathbeds.
Admittedly, I do that a lot when I write a story. Many of them take place in England. I went to study abroad and I loved it so much. Obviously, this is a way to get back there because it is so different from your home. They have different rules, they have different things there that you don't have here, depending what time period it is. I can definitely see why she would feel the edge to write out. It is almost like being able to explore the world just from the safety of your own home, too.
Somebody commented quite recently how Louisa May Alcott liked to write about Spaniards in her stories, Spaniards, French, and Germans. She definitely placed her stories in Europe and romantic countries.
The less than minimum wage is cheating on somebody, they're right. And the fact that Mr. Dashwood, refers to the writers as hacks, he doesn't even have any respect for them. And I don't know, is it because she is also a woman that way? She gets paid lower wage too. To think that she puts all that effort into it, reading articles, studying people, and going to libraries to look up stuff. She puts so much effort into it only to get, like, they don't say it in this chapter, but a quarter to what a guy is probably getting $1. It is sad, and it gets me too when it says her readers were not particular about such trifles as grammar, punctuation, and probability. That would drive me nuts. That is one of the biggest things that bothers me. The grammar, the punctuation. The comma should have been there. Why there is two to ends and this doesn't make sense. When just on the page before you said that the dress is blue and now the dress is red. Even if she wasn't writing sensationalism but a very genuine story, the fact that her readers are not particular about stuff like that, it means that she gets quite slack on her grammar and punctuation. That will affect the serious work she wants to do. It is those little details that just even if you would try to make an argument, oh, sensational stories are good for her, well, on basic writing, etiquette, grammar, and punctuation probability will translate to your other writings. You get so used to writing it that way. That is when you get to writing a different story. It will carry over. You won't think about it until someone points it out.
It is funny. We just talked about Joe being disposable when it says that Mr. Dashwood requested her to fill these columns with the lowest prices, not thinking it necessary to tell her that the real cost for his hospitality was that one of his hacks was being offered higher wages and left him in the lurch. So is writing these stories and she thinks it is just great, but she gets paid the lowest wage and she is filling his columns.
She doesn't even have an employer who respects her. He sees her as another writer to fill his columns again, even if you could sit there and say, well, sensational writings are good. It is not going to help her to see what is good input and what is bad input because he is not a good employer. He is taking advantage of her inexperience in the publishing world.
I agree. I have come across people who say that, oh, writing sensational stories was good practice for Joe. But I don't think so. This is not good literature. This is something very cheap, and her talents are being used in ways that are not good for her. She could be doing so many other good things with her talents.
Yeah, I have been trying to write through high school every second. My dad is always saying, oh, she is writing a trilogy. That was the first thing I told him. And now I'm like, Dad, you need to stop saying that because that story is not going to happen. Why? Because I went back to it and that story has faded. It was something that was very 2000 fan fiction that was written by a girl filled with these very old fashioned tropes and triangles between bad boy who is low-key abusive. It is cringeworthy, but they love reading cringeworthy stuff. No, Dad, no, that will never see the light of day. That is probably the closest I have to identifying with her sensational writing. It is not my greatest work. It may have applied to a certain audience at the time when looking back, it was an old shame, but it was a good start. And now for me to sit back and go, okay, this is not my best work. I am so glad to see I have improved since then. And we just put that far away. And it wasn't like I didn't learn anything from it. I was in high school, never really got to experience anything in my life. And it wasn't until my college years I met people from other places and got to have more open-minded ideas about how things could be. Then I started really go like, okay, this is when my writing improved. That piece that I wrote back then didn't help my writing. If I had continued to use that as a format as a writer, I would be horrible. I look at it. I am glad to see I am improved, but I don't use that as a turning point where I learned a lesson because I didn't learn that lesson so many years later. I think that when people say, oh, she is learning from sensational stories, what are you learning? You are not learning how to write properly. You are learning to write as the time is or what people want, not really what is true to how you feel what you want to write.
I can really relate to this chapter because when I did one of my first illustration jobs, one of my first clients was not rude, but always asked changes after I had finished one piece and then another piece. It was just non-stop and the payment wasn't that great. And I don't really care to talk about it. I just kind of want to forget that it ever happened. I think it is so interesting that Louisa May Alcott censored her journals about her time working for Frank Leslie. I do get the feeling that she was ashamed of working in this magazine. We all do stupid things when we are young. You don't have the experiences. This was one experience among others, but I understand why she didn't want people to know what happened during this particular time period in her life.
Yes, because it is not even like writing, let's just say, a very sloppy way of writing a strong female character or a type of character. Again, I am thinking a hero of tropes where the hero girl outweighs all other girls and be an action girl. And pretty much any other girl she encounters is quote unquote slut or quote unquote bitch or quote unquote weak. She is not the best character. It's a trope. Girls can be kick ass and have the sword. And if you do not do what I am doing and you are not feminist, that is one extreme. Feminist is not good. Whereas if you went from, if you are not feminist, want to stay at home and be a mother, if you are not doing that, even if that is what you want to do, that is not feminist. It is not like there is that, or, oh, here is a really cool female character who is breaking the mold, even if there is a little bit of misogyny in it. These gory stories either offer some sort of conflict or thought. I think of Poe. With Poe, even if the story is gory or horrifying, there is still this backstory to it, or there is a thought. Let's just say the telltale heart it does provoke thought of was the old man really this evil character that deserved to die, or was the young man just having evil in his heart? And is that inherited in every person? Can someone be as bad? At least that kind of story helps to create some sort of thought. Question of human nature, whereas these stories are just bloody and gory, and why bother? Another thing, I hate it when people call certain movies horror movies when it is just a gore fest. When I was in high school, I watched a movie called Woman in Black with Daniel Radcliffe, and I liked it a lot. I thought it was genuinely scary because I heard there is a ghost who drives children to their deaths. Terrifying. When I was talking about it in the class the next day, some girl was like, I watched that. It wasn't scary enough. There wasn't blood at all. And I was like, that is what makes it creepy for you. If you were that type of person, oh, blood makes me queasy and that is horrifying to me. And that is why it scares me. I get it, but blood does not always equal horror. And for most horror movies are supposed to be thought-provoking tales. I am right now looking at my copy of Carrie. It is scary to think that one minute you have this so-called nobody, and then the next day they see a whole new terror destroying the whole town. But what does it say that this kid who has been bullied and had nobody to help her deal with her emotions, and then finally blows up in the most deadly way possible? There is a thought behind the horror story, and I just feel when I read this chapter and Joe describes what the sensational stories are like, it is just a lot of guts and murders, and there is no thought that provokes the reader to think beyond, why did this person kill that person? Is there any reason? No, just to be an asshole. Okay. There is a difference, I think, between sensational stories and thoughtful stories, like there is between horror movies and the gore feast, as they call it, to be gory just for the sake of it.
I think I read from one of Louisa May Alcott's journals. It was written during this time she was writing sensational stories. And there's a quote where she says that she's struck with this story and she doesn't want to write it. She doesn't want to finish it. She doesn't want to add the gory details or whatever the editor is asking. There's a moment where she writes that Emerson tells her to write something that she enjoys herself and study character. So we have the Fredrik Bear connection there. It is interesting how people say that this is a good thing for Joe, that Joe is a feminist when she writes these sensational stories. She's not a feminist, and she's getting paid really poorly.
Yes, because it is not even like writing, let's just say, a very sloppy way of writing a strong female character or a type of character. Again, I am thinking a hero of tropes where the hero girl outweighs all other girls and be an action girl, and pretty much any other girl she encounters is quote unquote slut or quote unquote bitch or quote unquote weak because she doesn't do. She is not the best character. It's a trope. Girls can be kick-ass and have the sword. And if you do not do what I am doing and you are not feminist, that is one extreme feminist is not good. Whereas if you went from, if you are not feminist, want to stay at home and be a mother, if you are not doing that, even if that is what you want to do, that is not feminist. It is not like there is that, or, oh, here is a really cool female character who is breaking the mold, even if there is little bit misogyny in it. These gory stories, you either offer some sort of conflict. I think of Poe. With Poe, even if the story is gory or horrifying, there is still this backstory to it, or there is a taut, let's just say the telltale heart. It does provoke thought of, was the old man really this evil character that deserved to die, or was the young man just having evil in his heart, and is that inherited in every person? Can someone be as bad? At least that kind of stories help to create some sort of taut question of human nature, whereas these stories are just bloody and gory, and why bother? Another thing, I hate it when people call certain movies horror movies when it is just a gore fest. When I was in high school, I watched this movie called Woman in Black with Daniel Radcliffe, and I liked it a lot. I thought it was genuinely scary because I hear there is a ghost who drives children to their death. Terrifying. When I was talking about it in the class the next day, some girl was like, I watched that. It wasn't scary enough. There wasn't blood at all. And I was like, that is what makes it creepy for you. If you were that type of person, blood makes me queasy, and that is horrifying to me, and that is why it scares me. I get it, but blood does not always equal horror. And for most horror movies are supposed to be thought-provoking tales. I am right now looking at my copy of Carrie. It is scary to think that one minute you have this so-called nobody, and then the next day they see a whole new terror destroying the whole town. But what does it say that this kid who has been bullied and had nobody to help her deal with her emotions and then finally blows up in the most deadly way possible? There is a taut behind the horror story, and I just feel when I read this chapter and Joe describes what the sensational stories are like, it is just a lot of guts and murders, and there is no taut what provokes the reader to think beyond, why did this person kill that person? Is there any reason? No, just to be an asshole. Okay, there is a difference, I think, between sensational stories and thoughtful stories, like there is between horror movies and the gore feast, like they call, to be gory just for the sake of it.
Thank you so much for listening. Christina and I continue our chat next time. Take care and make good choices. Bye.